speakers. Today, we've got Michael and Brett, who are going to be talking to us about Zapier and operations and really cool things that we could be doing to drive efficiency in our operations in support of customer success. So like I said, I love the topics that we're featuring and the speakers because it is so diverse. We are not featuring any of the same boring stuff, new stuff every week. So that said, I know you're all tired of hearing from me. I am going to welcome our two speakers. Hi, Michael. Hi, Brett. How are you? And I'm going to encourage you both to come off mute. Okay, there we go.
We're great.
Fantastic.
Very good. Well, listen, I am going to pass it over to the two of you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Before we start sharing your screens, though, I would love if you could both just introduce yourselves to your lovely audience that you have, so that way they get a little familiar with who you both are, and then we'll get started with our content for today.
Sure. I'm going to actually pull up slides because we have slides.
Okay.
Probably tell a good story about both of us. So give me just 2 seconds to get the screen share going. There we go. All right. So introductions, as Christy asked. So
I love the rule following.
Yes. My name is Brett Meadors. I am a manager for customer adoption at a company called Captivate IQ. We are a sales commission platform. We help customers get their sales commissions process automated and into a great place for their sales reps and other folks who are earning commission to be able to see that information and have the process be automated, saving them lots of time each month, which is fantastic. My background, I was previously managing on our customer success team. And prior to that, I was working for a staffing company that did SaaS work as well. And prior to that, I've worked in education. A little bit about me as a person. My background, like I said, was in education. And then I now live in South Carolina with my wife, Lynn. And then we have 2 dogs and 4 cats. So I'll pass it over to Michael.
Thanks, Brett. My name is Michael Bojanski. I'm the Director of Customer Support Operations at Learn to Win. Learn to Win is a light learning management solution. Think of it like Duolingo, but you can author and create any type of content that you want and then be able to push it out to different types of learners. We serve people in athletics, think like sports team coaches, creating content for their athletes. Business solutions, we do a lot of sales enablement training, as well as the Department of Defense, as we have a version of our platform that can host classified information. On our CS team, I have my own book of business, as well as do a bunch of different things on the ops side. My background, I've worked in a bunch of different internal operations roles. I have dabbled in marketing, in finance and accounting, a lot of experience in different types of internal tech stack systems. Recently won a Customer Success Excellence Award for Best Use of Technology using Zapier. And so this is something that I'm really passionate about and have appreciated the support that Christy and her team has provided. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I saw one person from the chat that's in Durham. And my wife, Rachel, lives here as well. She goes to Duke. I went to UNC for undergrad, so we're a little bit of a house divided. I love playing board games and performing improv, and you can see we also have an audience member of our dog JJ here in the background.
As a lifelong Duke fan, Michael, I don't know that we can continue this. No, I'm kidding. Totally kidding.
Ended before it started. All right, guys, I'm going to go off camera. You guys will just take it away. I'll be watching the chat. Anything I can answer, I will. Otherwise, I'll be teeing up Q&A for the end of our session today.
Perfect. Thanks, Christy. All right, so like most webinars, first thing we want to start with, we want to kind of just get a gauge of the audience. So I'm going to queue up a poll here. It should be appearing on your screen in just a second. So we'll take a couple of seconds and give you guys an opportunity to answer the poll. Fascinating to see this moving live. All right. It looks like we're still getting a couple responses. I'll give it just a few more seconds. I think an internal tech stack is always one of those things that, you don't always get to choose what's in your internal tech stack. And I'm sure Michael's experienced this as well. Like you have some influence, but you don't always kind of get the final say. And so it's always interesting to see kind of how people feel about what is currently in place at the companies they are at. Michael, are you able to see the data on your side as well?
I can't. Yeah. Looks like most people are solidly in the middle. So a normal distribution around the average of 3.
Yeah, which is sort of what I would expect. You're kind of neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, which maybe something we teach you guys today about Zapier will help you get firmly into the satisfied camp. So I am going to jump on to the next slide. We'll end this poll and share the results with folks as well. All right, so why should you guys be listening to Michael and I today? And this is something that we really were able to kind of whittle down to 4 things that we think are important to kind of touch on with automation. And automation and integration of tools are important, really because 1, you're likely wasting time if you're not trying to integrate and automate some of your tools, whether that's having people manually do movement of data or manually, looking in one system to get something to then have to go somewhere else. It can put you in a place where you're spending hours of time trying to get things into the right place or into the right tool without, necessarily needing to be doing that. And so the second thing we then established was it encourages mistakes happening. I thought this image was a good representation that, like, at the end of the day, if you're manually moving data and things aren't automated, the likelihood is that, if I'm editing a spreadsheet and copying a cell over, I could start on the wrong row, or I could not copy something I need to copy over. And so having an automated and repeatable process in place is important. Thirdly, managing multiple sources of data. I would guess based off the poll I saw, as well as just knowing the demographic of customers that client success has, that a lot of you guys have more than one source of data that is, feeding all the different tools you're using. I think this is something that will only continue to become more of a problem as there are more tools that are coming up to automate and improve different things. But ultimately, like, the likelihood is you have one source of truth for something, but you may have 10 things that feed that source of truth. And so making sure that all of them can talk is really important. And then lastly, really just unlocking features. So Michael and I were talking about this yesterday. Client success, fantastic tool. We love it. Absolutely everybody should buy it. But there are sometimes things that you want to do with a tool, and it may just not do it natively out of the box. And there's only so much resourcing that any company can provide around product development. And so being able to take a tool like Zapier and throw it on top of client success really can help just unlock a whole bunch of different things that you couldn't maybe natively do. But that could help them then decide, oh, we should natively support this. And so it can be something really good, and kind of thinking about why automation matters. Michael.
All right. So Brett and I also had a discussion, is it okay to ever manually move data, with the goal that automation generally is something we want to lean towards, with digital customer success being a major trend right now. There are 3 situations that I was thinking through where I actually think manually moving things around could still be okay. One is just thinking about the setup costs and setup time. So if you have, let's say, a contract, maybe contracts close once a month and you only have a few that close, it might take you 10 hours to set up this automation, but it's going to take you 10 minutes, once a month to do something. You just have to weigh that opportunity cost and also some of the other consequences that might happen. So it could very well be that you're just going to copy paste for a little bit longer until you scale that part of the business more. The second thing is you're still defining the process. So a great example from my experience is we had Salesforce as the tool that our sales team was using, and then client success as the team our customer success team was using. And we were wanting to have revenue information flow between them, but we hadn't defined our product SKUs. And so until the dust settled there, I was manually moving some of that revenue information back and forth, because if your pick lists are different in both sides, then you're going to have a bad time, things aren't going to work, and you're going to be frustrated. So sometimes you just need to have the dust settle there before you link systems together. And the last thing is just, if you have messy data, it sometimes could be worth the extra set of eyes to make sure that you are not automatically pushing crap from one system into another. And by having that oversight, then you can prevent mistakes from impacting multiple different systems. So generally a bias towards automating, but sometimes in these different situations, you might want to pause for a minute.
Agreed, 100%. I think that it can also be a really good data hygiene forcing exercise to really go through and make sure your data is in a place before you try and automate it.
Yes. So for example, again, with this revenue integration, as our sales team was getting trained on these new product SKUs, oftentimes they were not checking a box correctly if something was recurring revenue or not. And so by manually looking over that, preventing our ARR numbers from being off, because I could give the feedback to the sales team that, hey, this is a box that is really important for us. Make sure you check this correctly. Here's some additional training that you might need to take.
For sure.
All right. So I think we have another poll. And so this is just getting at what kinds of pain points do you have? So we talked about your level of comfort within your internal tech stack and how well they integrate, but we also wanted to look at some of the specific pain points. So Brett, do you have the ability to launch that poll?
I do. I stopped sharing the one and I just shared the second one.
So here are a couple, this is not exhaustive. If you have an other that you don't see represents some of the options here, then just throw that in the chat and we can take a look at that as well. All right. Seems like monthly and quarterly reporting is winning, with sales to CS handoff coming in second. And yes, you might want to be able to select more than one, but select the most painful. And if you have a close second, you can also put that in the chat if you want to.
I'm glad to see it's not just us with some of these pain points of data events between tools and things. I always sometimes think it's easy to think it's just you, and I'm glad to see that lots of other people are feeling the same way.
Yeah. All right, so let's give it maybe 5 or 10 more seconds and then we can end the poll. So if you want to end that, Brett, and then share it.
There we go.
So you can see that the reporting side looks like a big pain point for almost a third of you, with sales to CS handoff being next, and then sending and recording engagements, and then payment and invoice tracking. And then there were some great answers that were also thrown in the chat. So if you want to go to the next slide. So let's talk about what is Zapier. Some people call it Zapier, so just different pronunciations there. Next one. So Zapier is a no-code automation tool. It's a SaaS product that allows you to connect different apps within your tech stack into automated, repeatable workflows. Next slide. So Zapier is something that allows you to punch way above your weight as a CX ops person. I don't code. I am very comfortable in systems. I am comfortable with logic and workflows. So if this thing happens, then I want these things to happen. These are what this data object looks like here compared to what it looks like here. But this is a tool that you can use without having any coding experience. It's really easy to set up. And so Brett and I both can seem like magicians to our teams. And oftentimes it starts with, wouldn't it be nice if this thing could happen? And I think that's where, if we go back to the first poll that we had, where a lot of people are in that middle zone of, we think things are like decently integrated. We probably have a good foundation. Maybe we have some native integrations between our core systems like our CRM or Salesforce and client success, or Zendesk and client success. But there's all these little things that are still causing friction or pain. And this is where Zapier really thrives. So from a cost perspective, It's dirt cheap. It really is cheap. And so this isn't something that you should get that much pushback from your finance team. There's a free plan that you can start and just test out different workflows. And then paid plans start at about $20 per month. And then, the really big plans are probably not more than $1,000 or $2,000 a month, which are, could handle pretty much any type of enterprise. And so I think we pay about 50 to 100 per month. From a functionality perspective, how it works is that you have a trigger. So it could be, if look at the right side of the screen, you have a new record in Airtable. So something happens. Maybe a form gets submitted, a new customer record is initiated, a Salesforce opportunity moves to closed won. So you have your trigger, and then you have actions that are below your trigger. You can have a whole bunch of actions. So maybe you have a Zap that does, 10 different things in 10 different systems. It might be really simple as this one thing happens and it sends a Slack message. You also have the ability to branch workflows. And so you could get to a certain point and you might say for a renewal, post this type of message, and for new business, post this type of message. So you have branching functionality in there as well. In terms of limitations, the main limitation is the app that you're working with or apps that you're working with, do they integrate with Zapier? And so if they don't, then you're fresh out of luck. But the vast majority of SaaS that's out there has some level of integration with Zapier. Client Success is one of them. They've recently upgraded and improved a lot of their interactions with Zapier, which is really exciting. So if you don't have an integration, that's going to be a little bit tough. If you have limited triggers are usually the things that are going to kick off workflows. So sometimes you might have to be a little bit more creative about how you're going to kick off a different Zap. And then just be careful with overriding data. So if you have something that's coming in and then you're going to maybe change a Salesforce record or, change a table in Airtable, you just want to be careful about what you're doing there, because especially if multiple people are sharing a system, they might not know where those changes are coming from. So let's advance to the next slide. And Brett and I are each going to go through two different examples. We thought this is the best way of just explaining Zapier as a use case. So hopefully these two examples spur some different ideas. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. The Zapier website has some great examples that you can see, both out of the box Zaps as well as different inspirations. So I'll turn it over to Brett for his two examples.
For sure. So like Michael said, your mind really is the limit of what you can come up with outside of the limitations we already hit on. But a lot of times it really is pretty much, if you can think of it, there's probably a way to do it. So I am going to go through two examples. One of my examples will be pretty simple, just kind of a quick 2-step or 3-step Zap that just kind of is a ease of use thing. And then one is a little more of a lengthy Zap that kind of really helps to power up some of the integrations that CS has with Slack. So I will jump to the first slide here. So first slide that I'm going to touch on is, or the first example rather, is just getting survey data into Client Success. So like most SaaS companies, we survey our customers a lot. And we want to make sure that that data is in a place where our CS team and others that are looking in Client Success can find it. And it was living in Typeform, which is a survey tool that we are using, and CSMs could not have access to that. So we just, from a licensing and cost standpoint, it wasn't going to be feasible to give them access to view the data in that format. So what we did was I put my head down, did a little bit of research, and decided to build a pretty simple Zap, which I will jump over to Zapier now. Basically, like Michael said, no code solution, real simple. You just kind of really take it and outline the steps you want to do, and we're going to touch on some best practices here at the end of the presentation around building these. But first example here, the trigger, like Michael talked about, is the thing that kicks everything off, and that's the new entry in Typeform. So when a new survey came in, I just identified which survey that was and said, hey, when this new survey comes in, do these actions. And so you can see it's the 4-step Zap. Basically what I'm doing is going in and taking the person's email address that completed the survey and looking it up in a spreadsheet to find the Salesforce ID, which in retrospect now, I could easily do with client success. I built this a little while ago, so I might just go back and rebuild this once we're done. But went in, look up the information I need in order to find the customer in client success, which is in the step 3. Once I do that, I take and create an engagement interaction. So I just label it as a note, and it goes and in the first, in the trigger action, I actually pull all that survey data in. So whatever the person submitted, I then am able to pull into that note. So I was able to pull in their responses, and it, I can format it in a way that's easily readable for the CSMs, and they can just go in and get a quick glance of here's what the response was. And then lastly, and I know our CS team loves this, it creates a to-do for them. So they know to go in and look at it. And so they just get a to-do with a date set from a week from when the survey was submitted, to go in and just say, I looked at this and it's good or it's bad, I need to follow up on it. So really simple, took me maybe, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes to build initially right off the bat. And like I said, there are probably some improvements I could make to it going forward, but it does the trick, and it's a time saver because it means their CS team isn't having to look and type format for this data. They're not having to know what customers have submitted a survey. So I really like it, super simple. And so I will jump to my second example, which is, gotta jump back over here, which is just building on top of the existing integration that Client Success has with Slack. So love the Slack integration. I'm sure a lot of you guys do. Our executive team thinks it's like the greatest thing ever, where the pulse updates flow into a Slack channel. They can see, how they're trending and what the last update was, and it's fantastic. But one of the things, and I think Michael would back me up on this 100%, is that I am probably one of the world's laziest people. And I don't like being asked for information that I have to go look up in multiple places. And so we were getting asked from our executive team on a pretty regular basis, like, what's the ARR of this account? Are they in implementation or not? When is their implementation supposed to be done? And just some of this other stuff, like when's the renewal? And like all these pieces of information that I'd have to go look up in multiple places, they're just no. And so I sat down and said, how can I stop this from happening so much so that I can focus on some other things? And took a couple of days and built a Zap, and I'll go over that. I'll jump over to that screen. But basically what it does is whenever there's an update posted to the Client Success Slack channel that we have, it goes in and looks up some information about the customer and then returns a post with all that information in it right under it. So to kind of dive into this a little bit, basically what I'm doing is I'm looking to see any new message that comes into a Client Success channel, what's it say? One of the things that Michael and I meant to touch on is some of the really cool features about Zapier are that it has a lot of simplistic but really good data cleanliness tools. And so if your data is in one format and one system, but you need to get it into a different format to go into a different system, Zapier has a lot of good tools to be able to do that. I think one of the best examples of this is dates. One system might have dates in UTC time with like a whole bunch of stuff appended on the end, and then another system may just want it in month, day, year. And Zapier is great about being able to convert things like this or search text and remove things. It's got some really good tools for that. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going in and looking for the text. If you know the Slack integration at all, basically what it says is the CSM just set the customer to whatever pulse. And so what I'm doing in these couple of steps is looking at that text, saying, all right, like this is what was said, so this can continue. And then going in and pulling a customer name from this. So these next two steps are basically going in and splitting the text. It's saying, take everything ahead of the text I tell it to and take everything on the other side of the text I tell it to. So it just leaves me at the end of the day with the customer's name. So once I did that, that was probably the hardest part of figuring all this out. Once I did that, I go in that same spreadsheet, look up customer, find the Salesforce ID, and then I go in and start looking for information. So I hit Client Success to get some information. Super simple, you just log in with your information, and then you can basically pull any stuff that's on the client or contact record. Then I hit Salesforce to grab some other information that we just don't store in Client Success currently. So grabbing some stuff off the different objects. One thing I would suggest, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the best practice section, is labeling what you're doing. Because I know Michael and I are both guilty of this, that like we have built a Zap and then not looked at it for several months. And if you don't label what you did, then sometimes it can be really hard to go back and figure out what you were trying to do. So you can see one of the nice things is that you can set up multiple steps within the same tool. So you can see I'm hitting our account object, our handoff object, and our implementation object in Salesforce. I'm hitting 3 different things. They're 3 different steps, but they're all within the same Zap. They're all actions that are taking place. So once I get all the information I need, I go in and basically replace some text that makes everything feed correctly. And to get down to the end here, basically what I return is once that message posts with a pulse update, it says, the customer is this much ARR. So it's, let's say 30K ARR, and the customer is currently live. Their renewal date is the following. And, this is some other information that they may need that like our leadership team finds relevant. And then what I did that kind of touches into the branching that Michael was talking about, I built out a continuation of this that if they're in implementation, it threads within Slack to then add additional information like when did the project kick off, when is it expecting to be done, who's owning the project, like that type of information that's really useful for someone to look at a glance. And so this runs automatically anytime a pulse update comes through. It makes the channel a little noisy, but it has been such a big benefit. Like I highlighted on my slide here, this has reduced our ask from our leadership team by at least 80%. So this has been a super effective one. If anyone ever wants help building out something like this, I'm more than happy to provide some consultation on that. But I'm going to pass it over to Michael because he's built some really cool ones as well.
All right. Thank you, sir. I would agree. I think a lot of work is done because we have the best interests of the company in mind, and we want people to succeed and be, more powerful in what they do. But there is a material amount of, I'm a little bit lazy and I'm tired of manually doing this thing over and over again. And how can I automate this part of my job, which then gives me time back in my day to do other things that I find more enjoyable or bring me more satisfaction. So the first example I'm going to talk about is linking Zendesk and client success accounts. So this hits on some of the sales to CS handoff activities that we have. So for us, a lot is kicked off when a Salesforce opportunity is moved to closed won. So there's a bunch of things that happen. One of the things is now that this lead is now a customer, they have the potential to start submitting support tickets, and we like to have the organization of that customer in Zendesk. But I didn't want to have to manually be creating that record in Zendesk, and I also wanted to easily grab that Zendesk organization ID and have it back in Client Success so that I can link them. Client Success has a great kind of native window where you can see tickets submitted by different types of clients. So if I can share my screen, Brett.
Yep, I was waiting for you to tell me when to drop it. There you go.
Let's see here. Okay, so we're back. So the trigger in this case is there is a new client in Client Success. So when that record is created, then this is what kicks off this Zap. There is a formatting action to tweak some of the data that's going to be coming from Client Success into Zendesk. The next action is creating the organization in Zendesk. And so it's going to have the exact same name that the client in Client Success has. I can set a vertical. So we don't do too much reporting within Zendesk on those different aspects, but there are a few core pieces that I did want to push over. And then I can actually push the the Client Success ID into Zendesk. So they're in 2 different places in case I ever needed it. And then to finish it off, I then go into Client Success and I add a task to that client, which was just created with the organization ID of the Zendesk org. And so now with no work on my hands, I've been able to create the organization in Zendesk, grab that ID, and then put it back into Client Success, where then I can easily copy paste that and link it into Client Success. So this is nice for a number of reasons. One, it saves me time. Two, I have parity in the names between different systems. It's probably really frustrating when, your Salesforce name might be different than your client success name, might be different from your Zendesk name, which might be different from a spreadsheet. And so the more similar those can be, the easier everyone's life is going to be. So that's the first example. The next one is invoice notifications. So this is a little bit outside of my swim lane in customer success, but it's still something that was causing some friction. So I think one of the top 2 or 3 pain points that people described was around payment and invoice notification. So different teams might have different levels of responsibility for this. But one thing that CSMs were asking is, has this person been invoiced or has this person been paid? And so what we did, and I partnered with our finance team and said, hey, QuickBooks can integrate with Zapier. If you set up this integration, what we can do is every time an invoice is sent or every time an invoice is paid, it will just send to the Slack channel of invoice notifications, and all the CS team is in there, and they can see that. And so if they're itching to say this person really wants this invoice, they can check there first. When something gets paid, then that's nice because sometimes people are chasing invoices or they're on a delinquency list or something, and then we can also understand and celebrate that. So new payment in QuickBooks, this is the invoice paid, only continue if sometimes we have some certain products that we're not tracking, and then it just sends this message into client success. So you can see here, a new invoice has been paid. We have some money bag emojis around it. Here's the customer name, invoice number, the due date, the total, and the line item. And you can have, this is the payment made bot. And we'll get to this in the end. Oftentimes, you'll have automations which won't be purely within customer success, and being able to reach out to other teams and collaborate on some of these, because usually they're touching multiple aspects of your tech stack, both teams will usually end up being excited and finding a lot of value in that. Back to you, Brett, with the slides.
There we go. I do have to jump back and show. I liked your GIF, so I do have to jump back.
Yeah, someone owes me money. So I think we've all been there when you're starting to deliver services, everyone's really excited, and you're like, oh man, they still owe me many thousands of dollars or however much you're charging, and so you're trying to chase that.
I actually stole this from Michael. I went and talked to our controller the other day for this exact same reason, that I think our accountant is getting annoyed at the number of times our CS team is coming saying, hey, are they up to date on their invoice? And so looking to steal Michael's idea here of implementing this. I think this is a real low-hanging fruit in regards to just communicating data out to your team that may be typically siloed. Awesome. So conclusion, best practices, getting to kind of the meat and potatoes of everything that we've been talking about. Number one thing, break things out into steps and take the time to whiteboard. Like, really, before you sit down and build something out, unless it's super simple, take the time to grab a piece of paper, or if you have an actual whiteboard, write it out and just make sure that you're understanding what you're trying to accomplish, because I, on more than one occasion, have spent an hour or more than I'd probably like to admit, building something, getting halfway through it, and then realizing it's not going to get me what I want, and then having to start over. So taking the time to whiteboard and really break things out is important. And then secondly, don't try and complete too many things in one step. You guys saw that I had a Zap that had 13 or 14 steps. And I purposely break those steps out into little individual pieces so that I'm not doing too much at once, because otherwise you run the risk, like Michael highlighted earlier, that you may end up overwriting data you don't mean to, or pulling something in earlier than you need it to be in there. And so just by taking the time to really build it out step by step and understanding what each step does, it can really help to make things work more efficiently. Secondly, label as you go. Like I said, you may not touch it once it's built for a while, and a lot of people come to rely on it. But then if you're asked to go in and modify it, update it, add more information to it, if you haven't labeled it and taken the time to understand what each step's doing, then you might be spending time that you don't need to digging back into it to figure out what you were actually doing in a particular step. So just make sure that you're labeling it. You can easily rename it. Zapier does a decent job of labeling them with kind of what it's doing, but going in and really putting some descriptive detail can save you time later on. Lastly, share your knowledge with others to help them improve as well. Like Michael said, this can really help you punch way above your weight as an operations person. Michael actually worked in operations. I don't, but I have gotten mistaken for our operations person before from some of the stuff I've done with this. And so it can really definitely help give you another upskilling opportunity as a CS person, or if you're interested in going into CS or CX ops down the line, it can be super beneficial to learn a tool like this. But sharing your knowledge with others, because they may have really good ideas about how they can automate things too, or how they can improve their own workflows. So we really encourage you, don't silo, label your work, encourage company-wide use. Big piece here, and I think, we talked about this that budget-wise, it's not a huge lift, but sometimes other folks in the company may want to be using it, and you can sometimes get that budget from other departments. Our engineering department, our product department, CS and CX here at Captivate IQ, we all use it. And so we're able to split that from a budgetary standpoint, that, sometimes that's an easier ask to go to your finance team when you're saying, oh, all three of these departments will contribute to it rather than just, one. And it can really benefit everybody. And then lastly, just like we highlighted earlier, whiteboard. Write it out first. Make sure you understand what you're trying to accomplish.
All right. So I have the conclusion and wrap up. Two things, and I think some of the questions, we'll dive into this as well before I hit conclusion, is in terms of Zapier versus native integrations, it's usually the case that a native integration is great for things that are happening very, very frequently. And so if you have a task that's happening thousands or tens of thousands of times, then that's probably when you're going to lean on a native integration. Client success has great native integrations with Salesforce. And so that's what we rely on for account level data and revenue data going back and forth. But again, wouldn't it be nice if all of these things happened on this and you're linking multiple things together, then I think that's where Zapier really excels. A few things for Zapier in the future. They just launched Tables, which is a light version similar to Airtable. Brett and I have both poked at it a little bit, but we think it has a lot of potential once they flush it out, especially if they add things like conditional fields, better uploads. But Zapier can not only be a connector, it can also then become more of a data repository and a hub for a lot of these different things. And so before you might, have to move to Airtable or Snowflake or something like that, Zapier could be kind of your next step in there. And then the last thing is Zapier does integrate with ChatGPT. I haven't used this a ton. I think it's just with 3.5, and so you don't get the full breadth of ChatGPT 4. But there are some really cool things that you can start doing with ChatGPT, I think, once it gets to 4. So in recapping the main points of the webinar, 1, automate your repetitive tasks, saves you time, money, headache, errors. If Zapier sounds interesting, we think it's fantastic, allows us to punch above our weight, and it's cheap. So it's a great solution for that. Regardless if you use Zapier, we encourage you to collaborate across your teams within your tech stack. I think a lot of times, if you silo and that goes on for a long period, when you do then want to integrate or you have a need to, and you have, pick list fields that don't match, you have names that are all different, you have some records which are in one place and not another place, the collaboration forces better data habits. And so this is something that's really going to benefit you. We're going to take some questions, and our contact information is up on the screen. So if you want to hit either of us up, then feel free to. So Christy, I'm not sure how you want to facilitate the questions now.
Here I am. All right, guys, thank you so much. You want to stop sharing, and then that way everyone can see you guys full screen. All right, very good. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing that. I love the visuals. So I've never seen inside Zapier, as I mentioned earlier. So for me, that was super cool. All right, we've got a couple questions here. So the first one is, what type of BAA or security structure does Zapier have when we're moving client data through? It has to do with supply chain security that we need to adhere to for both internally and customers.
Can take this question. Our security team did a deep dive into the Zapier before we actually purchased it, and our security guys don't exist on the internet. They're that good. So, I think that I am pretty trusting of what they say, but they are SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3, which I didn't know was a thing until about 5 minutes ago when I looked it up. They are SOC 3 compliant, so they do a lot to make sure that your data is safe as it's in transit. It's encrypted. They have, great DPAs, and they have lots of stuff in place with customers for the data transmission piece. But, a lot of times Zapier is just really serving as the middleman. It's getting the data from one place to another. But there's lots of compliance pieces that they're definitely where they have to be compliant with. And so, I would just send over, there's a whole website, if you just kind of look it up, that has all the SOC information on it. I would just send it over to your security team, have them take a look, but ours passed it with flying colors.
Okay, very good. Next question. So how does Zapier compare to Microsoft Power Automate? I've used both, but would like to hear your perspective.
I have not used it. So Michael?
I haven't used Microsoft Power Automate. I think I've seen someone screen share different parts. They're probably similar. I would say the big comparison point is how many other platforms are integrating with them. So I'm not sure if Microsoft Power Automate has more or fewer, but I have rarely been frustrated in trying to find an app that does not integrate with Zapier. I don't know for Microsoft Power Automate.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely probably the Microsoft Power Automate's likely focusing on some enterprise larger integrations where Zapier may focus on things that may not be as large, but that are maybe more common in the startup or tech space.
I know that Zapier doesn't integrate with Workday. I think because Workday just doesn't want to play with other people. And I'm not sure if Microsoft Power Automate does.
All right. Well, if anyone who's still here, if you have any thoughts or feedback that you want to share in the chat, please feel free to do that. We love everyone to participate in answering these questions. Okay, next one up. Have you ever considered using UiPath for automation? It can be expensive, but they have a community edition.
Same answer here.
Nope, haven't used it.
Okay, if anyone in the chat is using or has considered UiPath for automation, feel free to jump in with your thoughts there. Okay, next one. Is Zapier able to facilitate testing before using production data?
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so usually when you're building out a Zap, with each step that you add, you have to test it, and you have the ability to select which event you want as a test case. So as an example with let's say Salesforce, you could create like a dummy Salesforce opportunity and then use that through your whole workflow. And so you don't have risk of pushing something. So as you build out the Zap, you're testing at each step, and you have the ability to choose which data you want to work with.
For sure. I've probably built a number of the Zaps that finally end up spitting out into Slack. And I think I've probably driven a couple of my teammates nuts before doing testing. But yes, the testing is 100% a thing, and something they really encourage you. You actually generally have to acknowledge you're skipping testing when you're building a Zap rather than opting into it.
Okay, another question. How do you manage integration and operational requests from teams? Do you have a roadmap tool? So I guess as other teams are requesting workflows and automations, how are you guys managing that process?
I think for me, it's typically just making time for folks when they ask about automating something. We don't particularly have a roadmap, so I wouldn't say it's a large portion of my job. I probably spend 5% of my job doing this, but it's something that I just, will, if somebody's talking to me and I think of an automation that could work, or they are like, hey, could we automate this? Then we'll just set aside time, but I don't do it in any sort of formal fashion.
Most of the time, the zaps that I create, I'm initiating. And so I'm recognizing that there's a need somewhere because I have that perspective and seeing, oh, this is a repetitive thing. I bet we could solve this. As one example, somebody on our marketing team was complaining to me that he spends a lot of time manually handing off LinkedIn lead submissions that come into him to STRs. And so I poked around in Zapier and was like, oh yeah, like they integrate with the LinkedIn ad platform. And so you can totally have, when LinkedIn, lead submission comes in, then put it into this spreadsheet, or then, post it in Slack, tag this person, look up this thing. And he's like, this is a godsend. This is going to save me 10 hours a week. But that was coming mostly because I was kind of had a lookout. The submission, the requests that come in usually are for something that is repeatable. So we use a form software called Cognito Forms, which has a little bit more oomph than Google Forms. And there are sometimes automations of, if we have a Cognito form, we want to push it into a Google Sheet or push it into a Slack channel. And so people will say, oh, I've created a Cognito form. Can you create the Zap that backs it up? And that's something I've done a couple times. So that's a more common one, but no specific road mapping for it.
Okay, very good. We got a few more questions here. So next one is, what are some examples of things that you would do with Zapier connect to ChatGPT?
I have one. So one that I experimented with and ran into the limitation of ChatGPT 3.5 versus 4 is in this example of these LinkedIn lead submissions. The ideal scenario is that it could actually create a lead in Salesforce and properly categorize them into a pick list for an industry. So maybe there's like 10 different industries. And what was happening is that the marketing person was looking at the lead, clicking into their LinkedIn profile, determining from their experience what industry they went in, and then they would create this thing and select the industry. So what I was able to do in ChatGPT 4 is say, here is their LinkedIn URL. You are an expert SDR. Go to this URL, look at their profile, and then give me your best guess on what their industry is and output it as like a single text string. And then I could take that and then set it in Salesforce as their industry. So ChatGPT would do the work of determining the industry of the lead. So this worked in GPT-4, but I couldn't get it to work in 3.5 because 3.5 doesn't have access to Bing. So that's one example. There's a lot of stuff with like text summarizing or like rating things that you can do. But Brett, I'm not sure if you have any examples that jump to mind.
No, I've been thinking about how I could possibly integrate it into some different workflows. I've been really excited to see the work that client success has been doing with AI and ChatGPT, and I'm excited to continue to see some of the cool features that JD and product are coming out with related to it. I do think that if we revisit this topic in 6 months, I think you and I will probably have several AI-driven zaps that'll probably have been built at that point, because I think that we will have some better understanding of how it can fit into the use cases we currently have.
All right, we've got one last question here, and probably just enough time to do this one. Are there additional scalability limitations of Zapier or complexity limits? What, if any, use cases do not fit well with Zapier?
I have not hit them yet. I'm sure there are. In terms of like complexity or things like that, because at the end of the day, Zapier has a native API. You can do webhooks and you can do things that do get into the coding side of things where you can really like, if it's not in Zapier, you can still make them talk. So I haven't really hit a use case where I've been like, oh, I can't do this. It's the amount and level of effort I want to put into it in order to accomplish the end goal. But scalability wise, from my perspective, I haven't hit something where I'm passing too much data through or too many zaps or whatever.
The limitations I usually hit is if there aren't good triggers. But that's one thing, is sometimes you can advocate to the platform that you're wanting to work with and say, hey, I can do a lot more with you if you change this trigger, updated this thing. And that's something I actually gave feedback to client success and their VP of product, JD. I said, it'd be really nice if we could have an action of look up client by client ID. And so I think you saw in Brett's some of the legacy impact of him kind of working around that. But that's now something that's native. And that's one example of several things they've updated recently. And so me pushing that software vendor to improve what they can do in Zapier resulted in them producing more functionality. So I usually find most limitations around triggers.
For sure. And not to turn this at all into any sort of sales presentation, but I do want to advocate that client success is one of my favorite vendors that we have worked with from a product perspective. I would completely, continue to really agree with what Michael is saying around, if we go to product or we go to our CSM at client success, they're fantastic about taking our feedback around the product and how we can better use Zapier and client success and taking it and actually actioning on it, which is rare with some vendors these days.
Very good. Well, listen, obviously we appreciate that. And it's always great to hear. We are going to continue to do really cool things with ChatGPT and Zapier in the future. And so really just grateful for the two of you sharing your expertise and your experiences, both with Zapier, with operations, with client success. So thank you both so much for taking the time out of your day to share your experience and your wisdom with our community. We really appreciate that. For folks who are still on, just a quick update. Hopefully we'll see you back here next week. Next week, we have Donna Weber coming on, and she's going to be talking about high engagement models and low engagement models and how it's kind of both are done with. We've got to create this hybrid. And so Donna Weber is going to be joining us next week to tackle that topic. So if you haven't planned to attend and it's not on your calendar, please make sure that it is. We'll see you back here next Tuesday, same time, same place. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, you could follow them on LinkedIn, circle back with them, and then hopefully we'll see you all again next week. Thanks, everyone.